English Forward presents.
Hey, Max, how you doing?
Great, great. And you?
Yeah, good. Sorry about the misunderstanding, man. Gee whiz.
No worries, no worries. I blocked a whole hour, so we still got some time.
Yeah, that's excellent. I've actually, if you do have a little bit of time and it runs over, I've actually cleared out another meeting just in case. We'll just see how we go. But great to be chatting to you today.
Absolutely. Great.
I'd just like
Shall I
to introduce you to our guys, but go ahead first.
shall I activate my video or you just want to hang on the call?
I think we just do the audio is fine, Max.
Okay. Okay.
That's actually fine. But just wanted to introduce you to our audience. We're going to be speaking to Max Kops, an ICO analyst and best-selling author. He's an advisor and a consultant in the blockchain industry. Welcome to the English Forward podcast, Max.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Could you just tell us where you're from and where you're based in the world?
Absolutely. So I'm from Germany and I've been in this space for quite a while with a few coincidences actually. Because in high school I just started Bitcoin mining for, not actually for business reasons or for monetary reasons, but more because I like the idea of having a decentralized network and at the age of 17 to be part of it because when you're underage, there are not many things you're allowed to do that make no sense.
Yeah.
And that was one of the few things that I really liked. So I just bought some Bitcoin miners on eBay and I started to do that in the bedroom of my father. And that's basically how I entered the whole space. And I saw there's so much potential in it that I just kept on doing that during high school, during my studies. And as you mentioned, we published a couple of books in German during the time. And now 2 weeks ago, I just released my new book, which is wholly related to the topic of finance in the realm of blockchain. And this is why sorry, I've just been muted. I'm seeing a lot of potential there for the upcoming years, and it's going to be a really interesting space.
Yeah, that's great. What's the name of your book, Max?
Assets on blockchain.
Assets on blockchain. Okay, great. That's excellent. Yeah, I can see at school you were very involved in websites and apps and all sorts of things. So you've really been a pioneer in a couple of fields and started off early in the whole blockchain environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting to see how the space moved because my background is quite technical, and I was coming from the technical perspective. And back in the days in 2013, the whole space has been very technical, and everybody was thinking about technical implementations. And now, in the last years, it's been moving a lot into the direction of making it more business centric. So creating real value and asking the question how we can implement the blockchain in a way that it actually creates value for a company or it serves a startup to raise money through the blockchain, which is basically what I'm doing all the time in terms of issuing security tokens. This is what the book is all about. And providing not only startups, but actually also small and medium-sized companies with a new way of collecting money. Instead of going to the banking system, they're now using a decentralized system, which makes many things more efficient and better.
So, I mean, it seems that your previous experience, your technical experience, has really equipped you for your current role and passion in crypto and blockchain.
Absolutely, absolutely. For me, it's interesting to combine different views because, as I mentioned, it all started with a technical view, and now you have many interferences. So you have overlaps with legal questions, you have overlaps with business questions, and you need to make the technology tangible for everybody. So you need to make it understandable for people who are not having a technical view, but they still need to understand it. And that's what makes it really interesting when you do some technical implementations, but you keep it so simple and so adaptable that everybody profits of it.
I think the simplicity and that ease of use is the key, because when it's overcomplicated, you just have such a small market to actually work with.
I fully agree. I fully agree. It's all what happened in the very beginning was that many people had the idea that just having a decentralized network or just having a blockchain itself will solve a lot of problems. And this is something I definitely disagree with because let's take a social network as an example. Because most of the population on the world is registered on Facebook, and
Yeah.
at the early days of blockchain, there have been many projects that wanted to decentralize these social networks. And it does make sense speaking from a technical viewpoint, but the problem is that you have massive network effects. So it might be that technically speaking, your platform or your social network is much better, but the other problem is that at the end of the day, I will still register on Facebook because all my friends are on there, and these are network effects. And that's the sad thing about the early days, because many people missed out the general rules of business, and they focused too much on the real technology only. And this is what's getting interesting now, because now it's not only dominated by developers, but all the people are coming together. The lawyers are coming together with the business people, and they're coming together with the developers, and all working together on their solutions. And this is when real value is created. And this is what I really like about the space.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, it's funny because there's always been two camps, the centralized and the decentralized. And people had very polarized views. And I believe that there's a middle ground somewhere where we need to work to actually get the whole system to grow. I don't know if you share the same opinion.
Absolutely. So what you can actually say the same about the security token topic, because I've been following ICOs before STOs were becoming popular, and in ICOs that was kind of a thing that was really hard to understand for people who haven't been in the blockchain space before, because people implemented so-called utility tokens that have a value because they're exchanged in a network, and explaining that to a person who hasn't fully understand the idea of blockchain is a quite complicated task. And now what I see happening with STOs is that in some ways, and you were speaking about the polarized view between centralized and decentralized, in some ways, when we have the decentralized polarization, we're going a few steps back, because we're going back to the more centralized approach. We're including the same stakeholders. We're getting back to the banks. We're getting back to the lawyers. And at the end of the day, the same lawyers and the same banks, just with a minor impact and maybe a few less stakeholders, are doing the same thing. It's just a bit more efficient. And for some people, this is a step back, because we're going back from the vision of having everything 100% decentralized and kicking out all the banks of the space. But for me, this is actually the most important step, because if you don't do that, you can impossibly reach, because the mainstream is not having the polarized view on decentralized networks. And if you really want to make it tangible for the mainstream, you possibly even need to accept fiat payments, for example. You need to accept US dollars, euros. And let's say my grandmother, she wouldn't invest in a startup if she would go to an exchange, buy Ether, transfer to her wallet, then transfer to the project, and then receiving some tokens on another wallet that she has to hold, and she gets the payouts in Ether. So what's happening now with STOs is that people say, okay, let's use fiat currencies, let's use banks, let's use custodians. So all the things that we know from classical IPOs. And in many ways, we are losing a bit of the efficiency we had at the beginning, and we are going back to the more centralized approach. But this is the only way it makes it applicable for the mainstream and for mass adoption.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's all about education, because, you know, for so many years, the market has educated consumers to think in a certain way. And it's almost irrational to expect them to suddenly, in a very short space of time, completely change their point of view and the way of working. And a lot of it is about the trust. And yes. I think it's as we go forward, it's like a big oil tanker. You know, to try and turn it around, you have to do it in small incremental stages, and then it turns. So
absolutely. So that's what we are all trying to do. That's the purpose of publishing my book, to take the people from both standpoints, either the decentralized standpoint, where people believe that everything needs to be fully decentralized, but also the people coming from the other side and seeing the things, for example, from the viewpoint of an IPO and trying to make it better, which is a completely different perspective. But at the end, both of them work together, and both of them need to be educated in a slightly different way, because the person who's coming from the decentralized space and who's coming from the blockchain space, everything he receives of information, he's comparing it to this idea of decentralization. While if I speak to financial people, they're having a completely different viewpoint. You need to educate them from the viewpoint of something they can relate to, which is the classical financial world. If you tell them we're going to remove all the banks, that's quite a harsh thing. So you definitely need to keep both things in mind, especially in the educational point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, I don't know if your friends are any different to my friends, but I'm pretty passionate about blockchain and what's happening. But when I talk to friends about blockchain, their eyes glaze over and they're not too sure of what's really happening. And I think maybe the general market is like it.
In which way?
You know, I think it's about the education. So people have heard in general about Bitcoin, and they know about blockchain. They've maybe read some stuff. They've heard the news. The market's going up and down. People losing money, making money, and they don't really know how to engage. And it sort of puts them on the back foot because they're not informed. And I think if you know, you spoke a bit about adoption and how, you know, adoption, that's a critical component of what we're talking about now, because the future, we can get adoption through the masses or mass adoption, the technology will take hold and will be useful to a lot of people.
Absolutely. I mean, technology at the end of the day is a tool, right? Because it's quite interesting, because I didn't have this this opinion through all my life, but that's what I've learned, especially through the blockchain space, because at the very beginning I was working as an analyst for ICOs, and I've seen a lot of projects, and seeing what makes them good and what makes them fail sometimes was oftentimes that if it's just a technology that's not tangible or that's not understandable enough, it doesn't really help, and it doesn't make sense to start with the technology, because you might have a problem in the real world and you're going to solve it, and focusing on one single technology in beforehand doesn't really make sense. So there were many projects that were saying, we're going to make a blockchain project and we're going to do something with blockchain, and then they came up with an idea. And sometimes it works, but in many cases that's just limiting your capabilities, because in some ways it doesn't make sense to go with a blockchain. And sometimes it's confusing to people when I'm talking so bad and about all the cases where blockchain doesn't make sense, but I've seen so many cases where this was absolutely true, and that's why I'm having quite a critical view on that. And we should definitely come from the other side. We should start with a problem or a solution for this problem, and then look what's the best technology we can achieve that with. And it might be a blockchain, but in some cases it might just be a centralized database.
Yeah, I agree with you. Blockchain is definitely not the answer to every single problem out there. But you know what you said about those like thousands of ICOs that you've seen and companies that have been successful and not successful. If I could just ask you two questions. The first one is, what in your opinion would make a company successful in this space? And on the other side, companies that have failed, what causes them to fail?
Well, as I mentioned, in many cases, they didn't really consider the users. So what I look for is, just speaking about the product, there are many factors like the team as well, but just speaking about the product, for me, it makes sense to start early on with customers or with users to get your first feedback. So there's this idea of the lean startup, where people try to get early feedback from real customers. And this definitely makes sense, because you'll get a pretty early idea of what your people, your future customers think of your product and what they really need. And there was the problem with ICOs, because we quite changed the idea of startup fundraising, because usually you create something and you have at least a prototype or an MVP ready, and then you're going to collect money. And what we've seen in the hype phases in 2017 and 18 was that some people probably just made up a white paper overnight and collected millions of US dollars, and then and then started to actually work on the product. And that's like, if you have a software development background, that's what the people call the waterfall model, which everybody is speaking in a bad way about, because, well, you collect the money, and if you afterwards realize that your solution doesn't make sense, there is no real way to go back. And this is what makes many projects fail, in my opinion. And the other thing is that networks effects have a high impact, because in many cases, the value proposition was based on the fact that many people need to use the product. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. For example, the social networks, because that's quite contradicting. It's like a trade-off, because on the one hand, decentralization often makes sense when you have networks of many different stakeholders. On the other hand, that makes you encounter very, very strong network effects. So your solution is only valuable to people if you have a lot of users. And that's what I saw, because many teams were having a really, really technical viewpoint, and oftentimes they didn't have a marketing guy in their team or a business guy who might not be the best blockchain expert, but who just knows how to scale it. And that was what made them oftentimes fail, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It takes a lot of expertise and market knowledge anyway to know how it's going to sort of all pan out. You also involved with helping startups raise money for ICOs and STOs, and obviously got a lot of experience and knowledge in that area. What sort of process do you follow? And like in the market at the moment, what is more recommended? Is it an ICO? Is it an STO? Are there better versions? What are guys looking at?
That's a really interesting question, because I think my process that I'm going through is a little bit different than others, because the first question I ask, why does it need to be an STO? So ICOs, generally speaking, only make sense in very, very few products, because an ICO by nature issues a utility token, which means it's a token that is somehow used in the network, and it has a value that's derived because it's used and there's a certain demand, and so on and so on. So it only makes sense for projects that are actually built on the blockchain. And this is the main difference to STOs, because STOs means nothing else than just issuing a security that's stored on a blockchain. So it's basically applicable for every type of company. You can even take a coffee producing company that's going for an STO, because it's just a financial product, and you're issuing the same security that you might issue if the company would go public on a stock exchange and issue shares. You're doing the same thing with an STO, and you hope that it's more efficient. And the most important question for me is, why do you go for an ICO? It's pretty hard to justify for most of the projects, because as I said, it only makes sense for very, very few projects. And if it's an STO, you got to raise the same question, because now I strongly believe that STOs are going to replace many public offerings from the stock exchanges in a couple of years, or they will even completely replace it. But now we're just in the phase where everything is starting. We have the regulators issuing the first laws. We have the lawyers getting more experience in that field. We have the business people recognizing the topic, but it's all very early. And for example, the secondary markets aren't ready yet. So it's still kind of complicated. And this is the main question I asked at the beginning. Why does it make sense for you to go for an STO? Because it should not be the only reason to go for an STO, because you couldn't collect the money otherwise. That'd be an adverse selection, and that's not what we're looking for. But it does have some advantages. For example, going public can help you to already build a relationship to your future customers if you sell the securities to people who will later use your product. And you don't see them as investors, but rather as customers. And as soon as this decision is made, I spoke a lot now about the first question, whether it makes sense at all. For me, it's really important to Sorry, I'm getting muted all the time. So for me, it's really important to define your goals. So when you have made the decision that an STO is the right way, how much money do you want to collect? And what's the purpose of collecting the money from specific investors? Do you want investors that have a strategic advantage, who are giving in maybe their network and their knowledge, or do you just want to go to retail investors who might be your future customers? And do you have specific countries or regions you want to go to, because you also see some strategic benefits in doing so? And do you see any jurisdictions that are more advantageous than others for doing so? So these are all the questions that need to be answered at the beginning, and it makes sense to invest a lot of effort in there, because everything that's not well defined at this stage makes it a much more complicated at the end. And everything that comes after defining these things is a really, really standardized process. So you select the token that you're going to issue, the token standard on a specific blockchain, going to keep in touch with the secondary markets. You're applying for the approvals that you need from regulators. You, for example, file a prospectus if you fall under the regulations. So there's a lot of legal work included, but it's quite standardized. So you can always include the same parties for the legal part, and they're doing the same procedure, keeping in touch with the regulators and all that sort of stuff.
I think it's a great question, Max. You know, it's starting with the end in mind and having a very clear picture of what your outcome needs to be, because that allows you to put the steps in place that get you there. And I think you've seen many companies, as you say, just raise money on a whim and don't really have a clear path to actually getting their product to market. So
absolutely.
And I think it sort of brings me to my next question is, you know, companies raise money either via ICOs or STOs, but then you find a lot of companies actually have a hard time profiting and growing to become a viable entity actually after they've raised the funds. Would that fall, you know, part of that, where they don't have a clear outcome of what they want to achieve?
Absolutely. And the reason, of course, I was asking myself as well, what's the reason for that? And what I believe is that if you go for an IPO, the process is quite heavy and quite cost heavy, and you have parties included and stakeholders that are very, very experienced, and they can probably tell you that it might not make sense to go public, because they also have an interest in only providing high quality IPOs, because otherwise they'll lose their reputation. And here's this thing in the STO space, because many people are claiming to be STO advisors who don't have a real clue about what they're doing, and this leads to the fact that they might advise some companies going for an STO where it actually doesn't make sense. And this is why companies enter the phase of raising funds that would otherwise not be able to. Because if you go to a VC and your product is not sufficient enough, they will not give you money. And if you have a running company, but it's not sufficient enough to go for an IPO, the banks will not allow you to go for an IPO, while an STO, for many people, sets the entry barrier so low, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, it allows many projects that are actually maybe not in the right phase to do so, to actually do an STO. And this is somehow an adverse selection, which puts companies as well as investors into hard times.
But I think that raises another point in that it's good to, or pretty really advisable to find a company that would represent you and give you the correct advice that isn't just fee driven. Because often, you know, advice that's pandered around has got an ulterior motive, and you know, the outcome isn't considered carefully. Do you still find that there are a lot of companies out in the market that are like that are, you know, giving bad advice?
I believe so, yeah, because it's a conflict of interest oftentimes. So I've had many customers who were speaking to the companies who should issue the shares itself first. And there's a conflict of interest, because these companies oftentimes just want to do the offering for you and charge their fixed prices. So they do not really depend on the success of this project. And that's why sometimes they're giving advice that I would not agree on. And what I think is best is to always include different parties and respect the interests they have and maintain an independency. So the way I work is that I represent the independent party. So I'm on the side of the project, and I can look on everything that's on the market, and I can tell them independently whether it makes sense to pick this company or this company without having any interest, because I need to be independent. And that's why in my opinion, it always makes sense to include independent advisors. It's a little bit of costs at the beginning, but it can save you a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of stress if you otherwise would choose the wrong companies. And what I also see, unfortunately, is that many companies are making use of that because there are so many startups just hearing that you can raise a lot of money with an STO. And so they just do some Google research. They find the first company who's claiming to be an issuer of this shares or these security tokens. They speak to them, and then they're getting sold something they don't really understand. And this is how I work, because when I speak to the startups, I'm having an independent role. I connect the parties, I check what the parties are doing, I find the best connections and the best stakeholders to include. And this is what I'm getting paid for. And sometimes it's hard to explain it to people because they just think, well, I'm going to the issuing platform and I'm going to give them 200K US dollars and they're going to issue my shares in 4 weeks. But well, that's just, that might work in the short term, but you have to consider a lot of things. You have to consider your goals. And that's the question you raised before, Mitch, which was really interesting, like why people have a hard time after issuing the shares. And this is what is oftentimes forgotten because they're just going to do it fast. They're just going to do it with one issuing company and they lose the independency.
Yeah, it's funny. It's going back to that decentralized model again, where on that side of the scale, where the more people that you have that can give you input, the more balanced view and opinion you get, and it's not one-sided. So yeah, it's interesting that the best way is actually in that decentralized approach.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Max, what are you working on at the moment?
Where I'm working at?
Yeah, what are you working on? I know you involved in a whole lot of different things: security tokens, digital assets, etc. What is your sort of speciality?
Yeah, so what I'm doing most of the time, apart from just releasing the book, is that I help the companies find the right solutions and taking their own decisions in terms of security tokens. So I basically help them execute things. So I'm not a financial advisor and I'm neither raising the funds, but what's my role in the projects is to just help them execute and take the right decisions. Because as I mentioned, an STO should never be the main purpose of a business. They should focus on their product. They should focus on their business operations, on their cash flow and everything that's attached with the company itself. And the STO is just a one-time endeavor where you collect the funds in order to scale and to grow more. And this is why I enter the startups and the projects I'm advising for a couple of months usually. And I help them taking the right decisions, educating them, explaining them what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, finding the right stakeholders. And what is my main is definitely the independency, because that's what they can't get otherwise. Like I'm not attached to any issuing platform or something, because as soon as I do, I'll completely lose my independency. And this is the most important point. Like,
That makes sense.
do anything, just ask whether it makes sense.
Yeah, that I agree with that. So your role, does it go up to the actual fundraising? And I'll tell you why I asked the question, because something I'm really interested in is actually the power of economics and how a project can proactively protect its coin price in the market after it's raised the money going forward, so that it builds a sustainable platform. Do you get involved in that side?
So I think you're asking for the product side, right, of the company. So this is something I'm not that much involved, because I'm just helping them throughout a couple of months to actually go into the STO. But what I don't do is to go deep into the product, because these are two different things. And I don't really believe it makes sense that both sides interact a lot of with each other, because if I enter the product, this is nothing I'm experienced in and I know nothing about. But if they are going for an STO themselves, that's also nothing they're experienced in. So that's like a clear distinction of knowledge and capabilities. So I'm focusing on the STO and I let the company do the main business they are doing. And what I'm also not doing is the fundraising itself, because this is also something that would put me a lot more into the more dependent role, because then I would need to sell something And whenever you need to sell something, you again have a conflict of interest because you're somehow forced to sell something because you make a living out of it. But I don't do that, so I can be completely independent. I can tell them, okay, you go for this blockchain, you take this token standard, you choose this issuing platform and all that sort of stuff. And I'm completely independent. So if they call me and they say, Max, does it make sense to go for a nice STO? And I don't believe it does make sense. I'll just tell them, okay, sorry guys, I would love to work with you, but it doesn't make sense right now. And this is why I have this clear distinction about the functionalities.
Makes sense. Max, I want to circle back to your book. Can you just tell me a little bit about it and sort of idea behind it, what you're trying to achieve with the education in the book?
It's the right word you're mentioning. It's all about education because what we've been speaking about at the beginning as well is that all these STO and ICO things at the beginning have been developed within the blockchain space, but my vision for the long term is that this is not a topic that's just interesting for the blockchain space. It's interesting for everybody. And I believe that in a couple of years, we'll see almost all assets being tokenized and being stored on a blockchain. And this is the main purpose of the book, to educate the people from the financial space as well, and to explain startups how STOs work. So basically making it tangible. I use this word quite a lot today, but it's really...
It's a good word, eh? Very good word.
It really sums it up. Like in the book, I'm taking the startup guy as well as the financial guy from the very beginning, and I'm telling him like, look, this is the classical world. This is how it works when you go for an IPO. This is how it works if you raise money from a VC. And now here's the new thing. Here's how you do it on a blockchain. Here is when it does make sense, but here's also when it doesn't make sense. And at the end, when you have read the book, you should be able to think yourself like, what is all this technology about? Why do we need it? And does it make sense for myself to somehow encompass it?
Yeah, I think I need to get a copy, Max.
You should definitely do that.
Is the book actually out yet?
Is it what?
Is it available?
Absolutely, yeah. It's available on assetsonblockchain.com as well as on Amazon. So you will find the Amazon link on assetsonblockchain.com as well. And there's actually a lot more to come. So my main vision is not just to publish a book. My main vision is to educate the people in the field of security tokens. So just register for the newsletter and you will see what's about to come there. But I can promise you there will be more than a book. There'll be other educational materials, and there's a lot more to come, because my vision is that in a couple of years, the whole financial space will understand what the blockchain is really for, and we'll move back from the big buzzword, and we'll focus on real high value projects, and we'll encompass the technology to build something very huge and very great. And this is what I want to do with the brand Assets on Blockchain. So assetsonblockchain.com right now, it's just a page for the book, but there'll be a lot of more educational material that I'll go to provide this within this year. And this is all what helps me to educate all the community that's not just limited to the blockchain space.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial for anybody, looking to the future, to get an understanding of, what it could look like and how they can benefit. That financial education is critical, and most people just never ever put the effort in to learn about it. So,
definitely.
Yeah, and that's excellent. I know we at 1 o'clock. If you've got a couple more minutes, let me know. Otherwise, I really do appreciate your time.
Yes, absolutely. It was very great talking to you, and actually not just being on the surface level, but I really like the questions you asked, because we dive a bit more into the question why we do all of that, not what we're doing. The main question is why, and it was really interesting speaking to you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I tell you, Max, I'd love to chat to you in the future. I'm definitely going to follow you. I'll get on that, your email, and I'll get the book. But just wishing you all the best, man. We need more guys like you. So well done. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
You were listening to an English Forward production, the web's largest Learn English community and Q&A site. Everything you need to understand and improve your English. Visit EnglishForward.com.